I'm Sarah, 23 years old. 2 years ago, when I was 21, my father looked me dead in the eye during Christmas dinner and said, "You are the shame of this family," right there, in front of everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all watching as he destroyed me with 6 words. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, gravy getting cold on my plate. But what happened next? Well, let's just say those words changed everything, and 2 years later, I'm sitting here as an international recording artist telling you this story. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely humiliated by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. So picture this perfect Christmas scene 2 years ago. The house smelled like pine needles and my mom's famous apple pie. Everyone was dressed in their holiday best, laughing, sharing stories, the whole Norman Rockwell fantasy. My cousin Jake had just announced his promotion at the accounting firm. My sister Emma was showing off her new engagement ring for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Everyone was so proud, so supportive, so encouraging. Then there was me, 21 years old, fresh out of college with my music degree, trying to figure out my next step. While everyone else had these concrete, respectable career paths, I was still chasing what my family considered an impossible dream. "Sarah's exploring her options," my mom said diplomatically when Uncle Frank asked about my job prospects. She was trying to protect me, bless her heart. But my father wasn't in a protective mood that night. He'd been quiet all evening, cutting his ham with unnecessary force. Every scrape of his knife against the plate made everyone slightly uncomfortable, but we all pretended not to notice. "What exactly are you exploring?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. I should have deflected, should have changed the subject, but I was young and tired of feeling like the family disappointment. "Actually, I've been looking into some music opportunities. There are talent competitions, open mic nights, places where real artists get discovered," and he set down his fork. Actually set it down. The clink against his plate echoed through the suddenly silent dining room. "Real artists." He repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "Let me get this straight. You spent 4 years in college, and now you want to waste that education singing in bars." The room went dead quiet. You could hear the Christmas music playing softly in the living room, something about peace and goodwill. The irony wasn't lost on me. "It's not wasting anything, Dad. Music is a hobby, Sarah. It's something people do for fun, not something they build a life around." My hands started trembling. I gripped my water glass tighter, hoping nobody would notice. "But I'm really good at it." My professor said. "Your professor said what you wanted to hear. That's what professors do." He stood up, throwing his napkin down like he was throwing down a challenge. "But the real world doesn't care about your feelings or your dreams." My cousin Jake tried to intervene. "Uncle Robert, maybe we could—" "No." My father held up his hand, his eyes never leaving my face. "She needs to hear this. We all need to stop pretending this is okay." He looked around the table, making eye contact with every single person there. 23 family members hanging on his every word. "You know what people say about you, Sarah? About our family?" My throat closed up. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "They say we raised a dreamer. Someone who can't accept reality. Someone who thinks she's special just because she can carry a tune." The words hit like physical blows. I felt my face burning with shame and embarrassment. "You are the shame of this family. 21 years old and still living in some fantasy where life is a Disney movie. It's time to grow up." The silence that followed was deafening. 23 people staring at me like I was some kind of exhibit in a museum of failure. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of feeling smaller, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and realized something that would change my life forever. I was done caring what he thought. I finished my dinner, helped clear the table, said goodbye to everyone like nothing had happened. My voice didn't shake. My hands stayed steady. But when I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom that night, I made a decision that would put my face on television screens around the world and make my father wish he'd kept his mouth shut. I was leaving, and I was never coming back. Not until I could prove that being called a shame was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, 2 years later, as I'm about to embark on an international tour with my music playing in arenas around the world, I can tell you exactly how that decision changed everything. A few days after that Christmas dinner 2 years ago, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. 21 years of life fit into 2 pieces of luggage. When you're the family disappointment, you don't accumulate much worth keeping. I was methodical about it. I waited until everyone went to bed, then carefully folded my clothes, packed my guitar, and gathered the few things that actually mattered to me. My mom found me loading my car in the driveway at dawn. "Where are you going, sweetheart?" she asked. pulling her robe tighter against the cold morning air. "Somewhere I can be a shame in peace," I told her. She flinched at my words, and part of me felt bad for being so harsh. But another part of me was done protecting everyone else's feelings when nobody had bothered to protect mine. "Sarah, your father didn't mean—" "Yes, he did." I slammed my trunk shut. "And you know what? I'm grateful he finally said it out loud." "What do you mean?" "I mean now I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to try to be the daughter he wants. I can just be me." I got in my car and rolled down the window for what I knew would be our last conversation for a very long time. "Tell Dad I said thanks for the motivation." I drove away without looking back. I couldn't afford to look back. If I saw my mom crying in the driveway, I might lose my nerve and stay. And staying would have killed the part of me that still believed in impossible dreams. Looking back now, I can see that drive was the first step toward everything that followed. I didn't know where I was going. I had some money saved from part-time jobs during college, enough to survive for a few weeks if I was careful. The city was 2 hours away, big enough to disappear in, full of opportunities for someone willing to work hard and dream bigger than their circumstances. I found a cheap motel for the first few nights while I figured out my next move. The room smelled like cigarettes and disappointment, but it was mine. Nobody could tell me I was being unrealistic or chasing fantasies. Finding work was harder than I expected. Restaurants wanted experience I didn't have. Retail stores were looking for people who could work flexible schedules, but I needed something stable to pay rent. After a week of rejections, I finally found a job waiting tables at a small diner on the outskirts of downtown. The pay was terrible, but the owner, Mel, was kind and didn't ask too many questions about why a college graduate was desperate for work. "You running from something, honey?" she asked during my interview. "Running toward something," I corrected. She smiled. "Good answer. You start tomorrow." The work was exhausting. 12-hour shifts on my feet, dealing with difficult customers, learning to balance plates and take orders while keeping a smile on my face. My feet ached, my back hurt, and I fell into bed every night wondering if my father had been right all along. But then I'd remember the look in his eyes when he called me a shame, the satisfaction he'd taken in crushing my dreams in front of our entire family. And I'd get up the next morning ready to prove him wrong. At night, after work, I'd sit in my tiny studio apartment with my guitar. I'd play softly so I wouldn't disturb the neighbors, writing songs about heartbreak and determination, about leaving everything familiar for the chance at something extraordinary. I wasn't ready to perform yet. I was still too raw, too uncertain. But the music was there, waiting for me to be brave enough to share it. 3 months into my new life, I called Emma, not to ask for help or money, just to hear a familiar voice. "Sarah? Oh my God, where are you? Mom's been worried sick." "I'm fine, I'm working, I have my own place, I'm figuring things out. Dad asks about you sometimes." "Does he? He wants to know if you've given up the music thing yet." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell him I'm just getting started." I hung up and looked around my small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd earned every stick of furniture, every bill I'd paid, every night of peaceful sleep. For the first time in my life, I wasn't disappointing anyone, and that felt better than any approval I'd ever received. Now, 2 years later, I know that those first few months of struggle were essential. They taught me I could survive anything, and that knowledge became the foundation for everything that followed. Looking back, those next few months were the hardest of my life, but also the most important. Reality hit me like a freight train. I'd thought leaving home would be the difficult part, but surviving on my own was a whole different kind of challenge. The diner job barely covered my rent and basic expenses. Some nights I went to bed hungry because I couldn't afford both groceries and my electric bill. I learned to live on ramen noodles and whatever leftover food Mel let me take home from the restaurant. When my apartment's heating broke in the middle of winter and I couldn't afford the repair, I slept in my car for 3 nights until my next paycheck came in. I couch surfed when I could find friends willing to help, slept in shelters when I couldn't. A few nights, when pride prevented me from asking for help and my car was too cold, I found doorways and benches in the city center. Those were the darkest moments. Lying awake in unfamiliar places, wondering if my father had been right. Maybe I was just a dreamer who couldn't handle reality. But even in those lowest moments, especially in those moments, I held on to the one thing that made all the suffering worthwhile: music. Every night, no matter where I was sleeping or how exhausted I felt, I played my guitar. Sometimes just humming melodies to myself, sometimes writing lyrics on napkins or scraps of paper. The songs that came during those months were different from anything I'd written in college. They had weight, pain, truth. They were born from real struggle, not imagined heartbreak. I worked every job I could find. Waitressing at the diner during the day, cleaning office buildings at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends. My hands were always rough, my feet always aching, but I was surviving. More than surviving. I was learning. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could function on 3 hours of sleep and still smile at customers who treated me like garbage, that I could stretch a single meal across 2 days without complaining. I learned that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, but dignity was something nobody could take away. Most importantly, I learned that music wasn't just something I did for fun. It was the thing that kept me sane, kept me hopeful, kept me believing that this struggle had purpose. 4 months after leaving home, I finally worked up the courage to perform publicly. There was an open mic night at a coffee shop near my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a small stage and a microphone, but it might as well have been Madison Square Garden for how nervous I felt. I played one song, just me and my guitar, singing about leaving everything familiar for a chance at something better. When I finished, the small crowd clapped politely. Nothing dramatic, no standing ovation, but several people came up afterward to tell me they'd enjoyed it. One woman, about my mom's age, pressed a crumpled bill into my hand. "That was beautiful, honey. Keep singing." It wasn't much money, but it was the first I'd ever earned from music. I stared at that bill for the rest of the night, feeling like I was holding proof that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't completely impossible. From my perspective now, 2 years later, I can see that moment was when everything began to shift. That first performance was the beginning of believing in myself again. I started performing regularly. Coffee shops, small bars, anywhere that would let me play for tips or just for the experience. Slowly, very slowly, I began to build a tiny following. People who would come back to hear me play, who would request certain songs, who would tell their friends about the girl with the guitar who sang about real life. The money was never much. A few dollars here and there, enough to buy a decent meal or put gas in my car. But it felt like progress. More than that, it felt like vindication. Every night I performed, every song I wrote, every small step forward was proof that I wasn't just a dreamer chasing fantasies. I was an artist building something real. And late at night, when I was exhausted and discouraged and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, I'd remember my father's words. "You are the shame of this family." Then I'd pick up my guitar and write another song, because shame was just another word for motivation, and I had plenty of both. About 6 months into my new life, something started to change. Looking back now, I can see it was the moment when survival mode shifted into building mode. I was getting better at performing. All those months of playing in coffee shops and bars, of writing songs from real experience rather than imagination, of living every lyric I sang, it was making me into a different kind of performer, more authentic, more connected, more powerful. People began to notice. The coffee shop where I'd first performed started putting my name on their little sidewalk sign, "Live Music Tonight, Sarah." Mrs. Chen, the owner, told me I was bringing in new customers. "People ask specifically about when you'll be here," she said, wiping down the counter after my set. That's never happened with our other musicians. At the bar where I played Thursday nights, I started to recognize faces in the audience. A construction worker who always requested my song about working multiple jobs. A college student who said my music helped her feel less alone in a new city. A businessman who left work early just to catch my 8 o'clock set. "You've got something special," he told me one night after I'd finished. "Have you ever thought about trying out for one of those singing competitions on TV?" I laughed it off at the time. Right, because that's realistic. But the seed was planted. I started paying attention to those shows when I caught them on the diner's television during slow periods. Regular people, some with stories not so different from mine, getting their shot at something bigger. The more I watched, the more I realized that my story, leaving everything behind to chase a dream, surviving on nothing but determination and talent, was exactly the kind of narrative those shows loved. One evening, after a particularly good performance at a small venue downtown, a woman approached me during the break. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Linda Martinez. I work in artist development." My heart stopped. "Oh? I've been watching you perform for the past month. You have something really special. Raw talent, emotional authenticity, stage presence. Have you ever considered auditioning for Rising Star?" Rising Star? The biggest singing competition on television. The show that turned unknown performers into household names practically overnight. I've thought about it," I stammered. "You should more than think about it. You should do it." She handed me a business card. "Auditions are coming up in a few months. I think you'd have a real shot." That night, I sat in my tiny apartment researching everything I could about Rising Star. The application process, the types of contestants they selected, the stories of past winners. Most of them had backgrounds in music, formal training, years of lessons, professional experience. Very few had stories like mine. But maybe that was exactly what would make me stand out. Over the next few weeks, I spent every free moment preparing. The application asked for detailed information about my background, my musical experience, my story. Under What Makes You Unique, I wrote about leaving home to pursue my dreams, about learning to survive on my own, about finding my voice through real struggle. The hardest part was the video audition. I had to record myself performing, and every take felt either too polished or too raw. Finally, I decided to keep it simple. Just me, my guitar, and a song I'd written about leaving everything familiar behind. When I submitted the application, I tried not to get my hopes up. Thousands of people probably applied. The chances of even getting a call back were minimal. But 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Is this Sarah Mitchell? Yes. This is Jessica Chen from Rising Star Productions. We've reviewed your application and we'd like to invite you to audition in person. I dropped the phone, literally dropped it on the floor of the diner during my lunch break. Mel had to pick it up and hand it back to me while I stood there in shock. Sarah, are you still there? Yes. Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, Yes, I'd love to audition. Wonderful. We'll email you all the details, but the audition is scheduled for next month. Congratulations on making it this far. After I hung up, I sat in the empty diner booth staring at my phone in disbelief. Now, 2 years later, I can see that phone call was the moment when my impossible dream started becoming possible. But at the time, I could barely believe it was real. I called Emma that night, breaking months of minimal contact. I got an audition, I said without preamble. An audition for what? Rising Star, the TV show. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Emma? Sarah, that's incredible. I can't believe it. Neither can I. Have you told Mom and Dad? The question I'd been dreading. No, and I'm not going to. But Sarah? Emma, they had their chance to support my dreams. Now they can watch me chase them on television, because that's exactly what was going to happen. The audition was scheduled for a month later in Los Angeles. I took time off from all my jobs, which meant losing money I couldn't afford to lose, but this was more important than daily wages. This was everything I'd been working toward. I spent those weeks practicing obsessively. The song I'd chosen was one I'd written during my darkest period, sleeping in my car outside a 24-hour diner. It was raw, honest, and completely me. But standing in line outside the audition venue with hundreds of other hopefuls, I started to second-guess everything. These people looked like real performers. Professional clothes, expensive instruments, the kind of confidence that comes from years of formal training. I felt like a fraud in my thrift store dress and beat-up guitar case. First time? Asked the girl in line behind me. Yeah. You? Third attempt. I made it to callbacks twice, but never to the live shows. She shrugged like it was no big deal, but I could hear the disappointment underneath. You've got good energy, though. That counts for a lot. The waiting was torture. We'd been told to arrive early, but the actual auditions didn't start for hours. I sat in the hallway trying to stay calm, running through my song lyrics in my head, fighting off waves of nausea. What if I forgot the words? What if my voice cracked? What if they took one look at me and decided I wasn't star material? Sarah Mitchell? My number was called. This was it. The audition room was smaller than I'd expected, but more intimidating. 3 judges sat behind a long table, cameras captured every angle, and one lonely microphone stand waited in the center of the room. Sarah, tell us about yourself, said the judge in the middle, a woman with kind eyes but an unreadable expression. I'm 21. I left home to pursue music, and I've been supporting myself while performing in small venues around the city. What are you going to sing for us today? An original song called Starting Over. I wrote it during a particularly difficult time in my journey. I stepped up to the microphone, adjusted my guitar strap, and took a deep breath. Then I let everything out. Every night sleeping in my car. Every meal I'd skipped to pay rent. Every moment of doubt and determination. Every time someone had told me to give up, and every reason I'd found to keep going. I sang about leaving behind everything familiar, about discovering strength I didn't know I had, about believing in something bigger than your current circumstances. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Not uncomfortable silent. The kind of silent that happens when something real has just occurred. The judge who'd spoken before leaned forward. Sarah, that was extraordinary. You have something very special. The judge to her left nodded. Your story, your voice, your authenticity. It all comes together in a really powerful way. The third judge smiled. We'll be in touch very soon. I walked out of that room knowing something fundamental had changed. I could feel it in the way the production assistants looked at me, in the energy of the other contestants still waiting their turn. 3 days later, my phone rang. Sarah, this is Jessica from Rising Star Productions. Congratulations. You've been selected to move forward to the next round. The next round meant traveling back to Los Angeles for an extended period. It meant being away from my jobs for weeks. It meant risking the small stability I'd built for the chance at something enormous. The show will cover all your expenses while you're here, Jessica continued. Travel, accommodation, meals, everything. For the first time in months, I wouldn't have to worry about money or where I was sleeping or when I'd eat next. Now, looking back 2 years later, I can see that phone call was the moment my life truly began to change. I was about to step onto the biggest stage of my life and prove that sometimes the people who call you a shame are just afraid of how bright you might shine. I quit my jobs that day. All of them. Mel hugged me and made me promise to mention the diner when I became famous. Mrs. Chen made me a farewell coffee and wrote "Future Star" on the cup. As I packed my few belongings for what would become the journey of a lifetime, I thought about calling my parents. Part of me wanted to share this moment, to hear pride in their voices instead of disappointment. But I didn't call. They'd made their choice that Christmas night. Now I was making mine. I was going to prove them wrong on national television. And looking back now, I can tell you I enjoyed every second of it. Walking onto that television studio stage was like stepping into another universe. The lights were brighter than anything I'd ever experienced, the cameras more intimidating than I'd imagined, and the audience larger than every venue I'd ever played combined. But somehow, once I started singing, none of that mattered. The song I'd chosen for my first televised performance was "Starting Over," the same one from my audition. The producers had suggested I try something more recognizable, a cover that audiences would immediately connect with. I'd politely declined. "This song is my story," I told them. "If America is going to vote for me, they need to know who I really am." Standing at that microphone, looking out at the studio audience and knowing millions more were watching at home, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete certainty. This was where I belonged. This was what I was meant to do. I sang about leaving home, about choosing uncertainty over safety, about discovering that dreams aren't luxuries, but necessities. Every word carried the weight of the past year. Every note rang with hard-earned authenticity. When I finished, the silence lasted forever and no time at all. Then the audience exploded. Not polite applause, not the measured response of a television audience being prompted by producers. This was genuine, thunderous, emotional applause that seemed to go on and on. People were on their feet. Some were crying. The judges looked stunned. "Sarah," said Patricia, the head judge, "in all my years doing this show, I've rarely heard anything so powerful. You didn't just sing a song. You shared your soul." Judge Martinez leaned into his microphone. That level of authenticity, that emotional truth, it's what every artist strives for and very few achieve. Judge Williams just shook his head in amazement. "America is going to fall in love with you." Walking off that stage, I felt like I was floating. The other contestants backstage looked at me differently now. Some with admiration, others with barely concealed worry. I'd just announced myself as a serious contender. Over the next several weeks, as the competition continued and I advanced round after round, I watched my life change in real time. My performances were being shared on social media, my story was being picked up by news outlets, and I was getting messages from people all over the country who related to my journey. So, your music helped me find the courage to leave an abusive relationship. I'm a single mom working 3 jobs, and your songs remind me why I keep fighting. Thank you for proving that it's never too late to chase your dreams. Each week I sang songs that meant something to me. Original compositions about struggle and hope. Covers that I reimagined to fit my story. The judges praised my consistency, my growth, my ability to connect with audiences. But more than that, I was connecting with myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be anyone else's version of Sarah. I wasn't attempting to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. I was just me, completely and unapologetically. The producers started featuring my backstory more prominently. They interviewed me about leaving home, about the difficulties I'd faced, about what this opportunity meant to me. "Do you have any regrets about the path you chose?" one interviewer asked. "Just one," I said. "I regret not doing it sooner." With each passing week, more contestants were eliminated. Each Tuesday night, another dream ended and another chance was lost. But somehow, I kept advancing. Not just advancing, thriving. My confidence grew with every performance. My voice got stronger, my stage presence more commanding. I was becoming the artist I'd always known I could be. If only someone had believed in me enough to give me the chance. By the time we reached the semifinals, I'd gone from unknown waitress to one of the frontrunners. Entertainment magazines were featuring me on their covers, radio stations were playing my performances, people were calling me a breakout star and predicting I'd win the whole competition. But I tried not to think about winning or losing. I just focused on each performance, each opportunity to share my music with the world. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that those weeks on Rising Star weren't just about the competition. They were about me finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. The finale was still ahead, but in many ways, I'd already won. I'd won back my belief in myself. And that was worth more than any recording contract or prize money could ever be. As the weeks progressed and the competition intensified, I could feel myself changing in ways that went far beyond just becoming a better performer. Every time I stepped onto that stage, I grew a little stronger, a little more confident in who I was becoming. The social media response was overwhelming. My performances were getting millions of views, and my story was resonating with people across the country. Interview requests poured in from entertainment shows, magazines, and radio stations, but it was the personal messages that affected me most. I left an unhappy marriage after hearing your story. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to start over. Your music gave me the courage to apply to art school at 35. I've been estranged from my family for being gay. Your journey shows me I'm not alone. These weren't just fans. These were people who saw something of themselves in my struggle and found hope in my progress. The judges continued to praise my growth week after week. Patricia called me consistently extraordinary. Martinez said I had the most authentic voice in the competition. Williams predicted I would change the music industry. But the comment that meant the most came from a guest mentor, a Grammy-winning songwriter who'd worked with some of the biggest names in music. Sarah, most artists spend years trying to find their voice, their unique perspective. You've already found yours through lived experience. That's something that can't be taught or manufactured. As we approached the finals, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't nervous about winning or losing anymore. I was nervous about something else entirely. I was nervous about what came after, regardless of the outcome. 3 contestants remained. Myself, a classically trained opera singer named Michael, and a country artist named Katie who'd been performing since she was 12. All of us deserved to win. All of us had worked incredibly hard to get here, but I knew in my heart that this was my moment. The final performance round let us choose any song we wanted, original or cover, any genre, any style. It was our chance to show America exactly who we were as artists. I chose to perform a song I'd written specifically for this moment. It was called Grateful for the Pain, and it was about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalyst for the best things we achieve. Standing on that stage for what might be my final performance, I looked out at the audience and thought about the journey that had brought me here. The Christmas dinner where my father called me a shame, the months of sleeping in my car and working multiple jobs, the small venues where I'd learned to connect with audiences, the audition that had changed everything. Every single step had been necessary. Every moment of doubt and determination had led to this. I sang about gratitude, not the easy kind that comes when everything goes your way, but the harder kind that emerges when you realize your struggles have shaped you into someone stronger than you ever knew you could be. When I finished, the audience was on their feet before the last note faded. The judges were wiping away tears. Even the other contestants were applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Sarah, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion, that wasn't just a performance. That was a statement about the power of the human spirit to transform pain into purpose. The voting lines opened immediately after our performances. For the next 4 hours, America would decide who deserved to win. I spent those hours not thinking about the outcome, but about what I'd already gained. I'd gained a voice, not just as a singer, but as a person. I'd gained the knowledge that I could survive anything, overcome any obstacle, achieve any dream if I was willing to work for it. Most importantly, I'd gained the understanding that sometimes being called a shame is just another way of being challenged to prove your worth. When they called my name as the winner, I fell to my knees on that stage, not from shock, but from overwhelming gratitude. Now, 2 years later, I can tell you that moment was just the beginning of the most incredible journey of my life. But at the time, it felt like vindication for every choice I'd made since leaving home. Gratitude for every person who'd told me I couldn't do it, because they'd given me the motivation to prove them wrong. Gratitude for every obstacle I'd faced, because it had made this moment even sweeter. And yes, gratitude for my father's words that Christmas night, because without them, I never would have found the courage to become the person I was always meant to be. The winner's interview happened immediately after they announced my name. Confetti still falling, adrenaline still pumping, cameras still rolling, and then suddenly I was sitting across from the host with millions of people watching. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that this interview changed everything. Not just for me, but for my family and everyone who heard my story. Sarah, you've just won Rising Star. How does it feel? Surreal, overwhelming, perfect. I laughed, wiping tears from my eyes. I keep thinking about all the people who said this was impossible. Speaking of people in your life, we noticed your family isn't here tonight to celebrate with you. Can you tell us about that? This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day I left home. The moment when I would finally tell the truth about why I was here alone. My family and I have a complicated relationship, I said, choosing my words carefully at first. They didn't support my decision to pursue music. Can you elaborate on that? I took a deep breath. On live television, in front of millions of viewers, I was about to tell the truth that had shaped my entire journey. I left home when I was 21 because my family didn't believe in my dreams. They called my aspirations unrealistic and told me I needed to give up music and get a real job. The host leaned forward, sensing there was more to the story. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I slept in my car, worked multiple jobs just to survive, sometimes went days without proper meals. But I also performed in small venues, wrote songs from real experience, and slowly built the foundation for everything that's happened tonight. What specifically did your family say that made you feel you had to leave? This was it. The moment of complete honesty that would change everything. My father told me I was the shame of the family for wanting to pursue music. He said it in front of our entire extended family during Christmas dinner. That's when I knew I had to choose between their approval and my dreams. The audience gasped audibly. The host's eyes widened. He called you the shame of the family? Yes. And you know what? In a way, I'm grateful he did. Grateful? Because it forced me to stop seeking validation from people who couldn't see my worth. It taught me that the only approval I really needed was my own. Have they reached out since you've been on the show? No. And honestly, that tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. What would you say to them if they're watching tonight? I looked directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere my parents were probably seeing this conversation for the first time. I'd say that I hope they're proud now, but I don't need them to be. I've learned to be proud of myself. I'd say that calling someone a shame for following their dreams says more about the person speaking than the person being criticized. And what would you say to anyone else who's been told their dreams are unrealistic? I'd say that sometimes the people who love us the most are the least equipped to understand our potential. Don't let anyone else's limitations become your own. Don't let anyone else's fear keep you from becoming who you're meant to be. Now, 2 years later, I know that those words resonated with millions of people around the world. The interview went viral within hours. Chose herself started trending. People shared their own stories about family members who'd discouraged their dreams. But the immediate response that mattered most came the next morning. My phone rang at dawn. Unknown number. Sarah? This is Amanda Rivers from Channel 7 News. We're standing outside your parents' house right now. There are reporters from several networks here asking for comment about your interview last night. So far, your father has refused to come to the door. I hung up without responding. By noon, the story had evolved beyond just my interview. News outlets were now focusing on my family's silence, the contrast between my success and their absence from my journey. Rising star winner's family refuses to comment on daughter's success. Local man called daughter family shame. She just won national singing competition. Parents silent as daughter. They rejected becomes overnight star. My father, who'd spent my entire life controlling the narrative about our family, was now dealing with a story he couldn't manage or manipulate. And for the first time since that Christmas dinner, he was the one who looked foolish. The irony was perfect. And 2 years later, I can admit I enjoyed it more than I probably should have. The days following my interview were unlike anything I could have imagined. Within hours, my story had become national news. And by the end of the week, it had sparked conversations about family dynamics, dreams, and the courage to choose yourself. Looking back now, I can see how quickly everything spiraled beyond my family's control. News vans lined up outside my parents' house by the second day. Neighbors were being interviewed about our family, my childhood, my father's reaction to my success. The story had taken on a life of its own. Rising star winner. Sarah Mitchell's hometown rallies around local girl while family remains silent. The articles painted a picture I hadn't expected. My old music teacher gave interviews praising my talent and dedication. Former classmates shared memories of my performances at school events. Local businesses put up signs congratulating me. But the silence from my family grew louder with each passing day. My new management team was fielding dozens of interview requests specifically about the family situation. This story has become bigger than just your singing competition victory, my publicist explained during our first meeting. People are invested in the family drama now. I don't want this to be all about my family, I told them. I want it to be about the music, about inspiring other people to chase their dreams. We understand that, but we also need to be prepared for how this develops. Your family might decide to respond publicly. That possibility hadn't occurred to me. What if my parents decided to give their side of the story? What if they tried to make me look like an ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned her family for fame? But days passed, and my family remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no attempts to explain or defend their position. They were letting my version of events stand unchallenged, which spoke louder than any defense they could have offered. Meanwhile, my life was changing at lightning speed. Record label meetings, photo shoots, appearances on major talk shows. I was being introduced as Sarah Mitchell, the rising star winner who overcame family rejection to achieve her dreams. During one radio interview that went viral, the host asked me directly, "Do you think your father regrets his words now?" "I think my father is probably experiencing some consequences he didn't anticipate," I said. "But regret isn't the same as understanding why his words were harmful in the first place. Would you consider reconciling if he apologized?" "I'd consider listening if he apologized. But words are easy. Change is harder. I'd need to see evidence that he actually understood the damage he caused, not just that he was sorry for the consequences." That interview clip was shared millions of times. The phrase "words are easy, change is harder" became a social media phenomenon, appearing on posts about toxic relationships, family boundaries, and personal growth. I was accidentally becoming a spokesperson for people who'd been rejected by their families for being different, for dreaming bigger, for refusing to accept limitations others tried to place on them. 3 weeks after my victory, I was having breakfast at my hotel when I received a call that changed everything again. "Sarah, this is Emma, my sister, the first family member to reach out since my story became national news. Hi, Emma. I've been watching everything unfold, and I need to apologize." Now, 2 years later, I can see that this phone call was the beginning of slowly rebuilding what had been broken. But at the time, I wasn't sure I was ready. For what? For not standing up for you that Christmas night? For letting Dad say those things without defending you? For not supporting your dreams when you needed support most? Her voice was thick with emotion, and I could tell she was crying. "Emma, no, let me finish. I was a coward. I was so used to Dad's approval, so afraid of losing it, that I stayed silent while he hurt you. And I've regretted it every day since you left. Why are you calling now? Because I'm famous? I'm calling now because I finally found the courage to do what I should have done 2 years ago. And because watching you succeed despite everything we put you through has made me realize how strong you really are." That conversation lasted for over an hour. We talked about the past, about regret, about the possibility of rebuilding trust. It was the first step toward healing, though I didn't know it at the time. But my parents still hadn't reached out. And as the media attention continued to grow, I wondered if they ever would. The girl who had left home 2 years ago would have been devastated by their continued silence. The woman I'd become understood that some people need to hit rock bottom before they're ready to climb back up. I was prepared to wait and see which version of my parents would eventually emerge. 2 months after my rising star victory, the media attention around my family situation reached a tipping point that forced everything into the open. I was in the studio working on my debut album when my manager called with news that would change everything again. "Sarah, you need to see this. Your mother just gave an interview." I stopped mid-recording. "She did what?" "She's on television right now, Channel 7 News, talking about you, about the family situation, about everything that happened." Now, 2 years later, I can see that my mother's decision to speak publicly was the moment when healing became possible. But at the time, I was terrified of what she might say. I asked them to turn on the newsfeed in the studio. There on the screen was my mother, sitting in our old living room, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was clutching a tissue in her hands. "I need to say something about my daughter Sarah," she was saying to the reporter, "about what happened and how I failed her as a mother." I turned up the volume, my heart racing. Sarah was always special. From the time she was little, she had this incredible voice, this natural talent that just seemed to pour out of her. She would sing around the house, perform for us, write little songs. It was clear she had a gift. The reporter nodded encouragingly. "But your husband didn't support her musical aspirations?" My mother's face crumpled slightly. Robert was afraid. He'd seen so many people try to make it in entertainment and fail. He thought he was protecting her by pushing her towards something more stable, more guaranteed. "And you? What did you think?" "I thought she was extraordinary. I knew she had the talent to succeed. But She paused, struggling with the words. "I was a coward. I should have stood up to my husband. I should have defended my daughter's dreams. Instead, I stayed silent and let him say terrible things to her." "Can you tell us about that Christmas dinner?" My mother took a shaky breath. "It was awful." Robert was frustrated because Sarah kept talking about music instead of getting what he considered a real job. When she mentioned wanting to audition for competitions, he lost his temper. "What exactly did he say?" "He said she was the shame of the family, in front of everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. He humiliated her in the worst possible way." The reporter leaned forward. "How did Sarah react?" "She didn't scream or cry or storm out like most people would have. She just finished her dinner and went to her room. 3 days later, she was gone. She left a note saying she was going to prove him wrong." "Have you been in contact with her since?" "No. And that's my biggest regret. I should have called her the day she left. I should have apologized immediately. Instead, I let my fear of confronting my husband keep me from reaching out to my daughter. What do you think of her success now? My mother's voice broke completely. I'm so proud I can barely breathe. Watching her win that competition, hearing her tell her story, seeing how she's inspired people all over the country. It's everything I always knew she was capable of. Do you want to reconcile with Sarah? More than anything. But I know I don't deserve it. I failed her when she needed me most. I chose keeping peace in my marriage over protecting my daughter's dreams and her heart. What would you say to her if she's watching? My mother looked directly into the camera, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, if you're watching this, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I let your father's fear become my silence. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved. She paused, wiping her eyes. I've watched every performance, every interview. I've been so proud of you, and I've missed you every single day since you left. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope someday you might let me back into your life. And what about your husband? What does he think of Sarah's success? My mother's expression hardened slightly. Robert is dealing with his own feelings about what happened, but this interview is about my failures, not his. I need to take responsibility for my own choices. Watching that interview, I felt emotions I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Pain, hope, anger, love, all mixed together in a way that left me feeling completely overwhelmed. My mother had done something I hadn't expected. She'd taken full responsibility for her role in our estrangement without making excuses or trying to minimize the damage. She'd also done something else I hadn't expected. She'd publicly acknowledged my talent and success in a way she'd never done privately. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like maybe there was a path back to at least one of my parents. Emma called me within the hour. Did you see it? I saw it. What do you think? I think I'd like to talk to her. Really? Really. But not publicly. Not as some media spectacle, just a conversation between a mother and daughter who need to figure out if they can find their way back to each other. Now, 2 years later, I can tell you that phone call was the beginning of something beautiful. But at the time, it felt like the scariest leap of faith I'd ever taken. Even scarier than leaving home in the first place. The meeting with my mother was arranged for the following week. Emma coordinated everything, ensuring complete privacy at a small rehearsal studio where I'd been working on new material. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that this conversation changed not just my relationship with my mother, but my understanding of forgiveness itself. I arrived early, partly to prepare myself emotionally, and partly because I needed the familiar comfort of being surrounded by music. When my mother walked through the door, I was struck by how much she'd aged. The stress of the past months, the weight of regret, and the public scrutiny had taken a visible toll. But when she saw me, her face lit up with a joy so pure and overwhelming that I almost started crying immediately. "Sarah," she whispered. And then she was across the room, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home and saying goodbye at the same time. We held each other for a long moment, both of us crying, both of us trying to process the enormity of this reunion. "You look so beautiful," she said, pulling back to study my face. "So strong, so confident. You've become everything I always knew you could be." "Mom, no, let me say this first. I watched your interview, and I was so proud of how you handled those questions. The grace, the maturity, the way you refused to let anyone make you bitter. That's not something I taught you. That's something you found in yourself." We sat down facing each other, preparing for what we both knew would be the most important conversation of our lives. "I meant everything I said in that interview," she continued. "I failed you as a mother. I let fear and cowardice keep me from protecting you when you needed protection most." "Why didn't you stand up to him?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for 2 years. "Because I was scared. Scared of conflict, scared of rocking the boat, scared of admitting that my husband could be cruel." She looked down at her hands. I'd spent so many years keeping peace that I forgot sometimes peace isn't worth keeping if it costs your child their sense of worth. We talked for hours. About my childhood. About the dreams I'd had that she'd watched him crush. About the night I left and how she'd stood at the window watching my taillights disappear. "I wanted to call you so many times," she said. "I'd pick up the phone and dial half your number, then hang up because I didn't know what to say. You could have said you were sorry. You could have said you believed in me. I was afraid you'd hang up on me. I was afraid I'd lost the right to be your mother." "You never lost the right, Mom. You just stopped exercising it." That seemed to hit her hard. She was quiet for a long moment. "What can I do now? How can I earn back what I threw away?" "I don't need you to earn anything back. I need you to understand that I'm not the same person who left home. I've built a life, a career, a sense of self that doesn't depend on family approval. I can't go back to being the daughter who needed your validation to feel worthy. I don't want you to go back. I want to know the woman you've become. And what about Dad? Her expression grew complicated. Your father is struggling. The media attention, the way people in town are talking about him, the business consequences. He's dealing with a lot of regret. Has he asked you to convince me to forgive him? No. Actually, he said he doesn't deserve your forgiveness and wouldn't blame you if you never spoke to him again. That surprised me. It was the first sign of genuine remorse rather than self-pity. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about lighter things. My tour plans, my album, her life, Emma's family, slowly rebuilding the foundation of a relationship that had been broken, but maybe wasn't beyond repair. As the day ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years, the possibility of having a mother again. Can I come to one of your concerts? She asked as we prepared to leave. I'd like that, but as my guest, not as a photo opportunity. Of course. Now, 2 years later, I can tell you that conversation was the beginning of healing that continues to this day. My mother kept every promise she made that afternoon, and slowly, carefully, we rebuilt trust. But my father still hadn't reached out, and I was beginning to understand that some apologies take longer to arrive than others. The important thing was that I was no longer waiting for them to feel complete. I'd learned to be whole on my own. 6 months after my reconciliation with my mother, I was performing at a sold-out arena in front of 20,000 people, looking out at a sea of faces singing along to songs I'd written about pain and healing and the complicated journey back to yourself. Now, 2 years after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I can tell you this is exactly where I always dreamed of being. In the VIP section, I could see my mother and Emma, both beaming with pride. My mother had kept her promise and attended several concerts, always quietly supportive, never seeking attention or trying to capitalize on my success. My father wasn't there. We'd spoken once, briefly, a few months earlier when he'd called to apologize. It was awkward and halting, but genuine. He'd taken full responsibility for his words and their impact, but we both understood that apologies and rebuilding trust were different things. Maybe we'd get there someday, maybe we wouldn't, but that was okay. Over the past 2 years, I'd learned that you can't force people to change, and you can't build your happiness on other people's approval. As I performed the final song of the night, a new composition about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, surrounded by people who appreciated my art and understood my journey. In the crowd, I could see faces of people who'd been inspired by my story to chase their own dreams, to leave toxic situations, to believe in themselves when nobody else would. My album had debuted at #1. I'd been nominated for major awards. I'd been invited to perform at venues I'd only dreamed of seeing as a child. But the achievement I was proudest of wasn't any of those things. It was the moment I'd learned to approve of myself. After the show, backstage in my dressing room, I thought about that Christmas night 2 years ago, about the girl who'd sat at that table, desperate for approval from people who couldn't see her value. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Mel, the diner owner who'd given me my first job when I was desperate and alone. "Saw you on TV tonight, honey. Always knew you'd make it big. The coffee's on the house next time you're in town." I smiled, remembering the woman who'd believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That's when I realized something that put everything into perspective. My father had called me the shame of the family that Christmas night, thinking he was ending my delusions. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove that dreams aren't shameful. They're just dreams that haven't happened yet. Standing in that dressing room, looking at photos from the concert, reading messages from fans who'd found courage in my story, I knew that sometimes the best thing your family can do for you is force you to save yourself. Because the person you become when you choose yourself over their approval is always stronger than the person you would have been if you'd stayed small to make them comfortable. My mother knocked on the dressing room door. "Sarah? That was absolutely incredible." "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you were here to see it." I wouldn't have missed it for the world. As we hugged goodbye, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us back to each other. Not the old relationship built on my need for approval, but a new one built on mutual respect. Walking to my car that night, I thought about the girl who'd packed everything into 2 suitcases and driven away from the only life she'd ever known. She'd been brave, but she hadn't known how brave. She'd been strong, but she hadn't known how strong. She'd been talented, but she hadn't known how far that talent could take her. 2 years later, performing for audiences around the world, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell everyone who doubted her. Dreams aren't luxuries, they're necessities. And sometimes, The people who try to shame you for having them are just afraid of how bright you might shine. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, your dreams are never too big, and you're never too old to start over. Sometimes you just need the courage to disappoint the right people. Trust me, it's worth it. Looking back now, 2 years after my father called me the shame of the family, I can honestly say those were the 6 most important words anyone ever said to me, because they forced me to prove that shame is just fear wearing a disguise. And I'm not afraid anymore.